Hi, my name is Dr. Rich Wilkes and I'm a counselling psychologist both in the NHS and in private practice. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I hope to be there for the question and answer session, and everyone is very welcome to contact me with any questions through the contact information I will give at the end. I'd like to thank Trish for this opportunity to speak on divorce and how it might interact with trauma. I've had the privilege of working quite extensively with trauma throughout my career, and divorce has the potential to represent a particular milestone in trauma, as well as having the potential to be traumatic itself. So over the half hour, we'll start with some of the possible significances trauma may represent. We'll move on to what trauma is in a psychiatric sense when we consider post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic responses, as I will call them, as indeed I hope I'll convey there's nothing disordered about them and that they're natural and evolutionary based responses. We will broaden this out into complex trauma and some of the potential significances of divorce to it. Then we'll come back to divorce itself and think of trauma more generally and how we might use some of the principles I've discussed to consider how therapy may help. Now, I have a terrible habit of going into great theoretical depth on things, so I've tried to keep it as light as possible. If you do make it through, don't feel you have to take notes, as I will post this presentation online at an address I'll give at the end. Please do also look after yourself. These are topics that can be emotionally challenging and remind us of difficult situations and memories. So naturally, divorce can represent different things to different people, depending on what the relationship has been like, the circumstances around the divorce, and the people separating. You will take your own significance from what has happened and likely feel a number of emotions in response. Specific to trauma, separation can represent the loss of much of one's stability. One's home, house, belongings, even one's children or pets can feel threatened, changed or lost. Even the familiarity of the relationship or the positive in the relationship, however small, may feel gone. Where any of these supports is lost, there is a potential for previous trauma to manifest without the maintenance those things have offered. Or where trauma is more complex, they may feel like there is a further disappointment or failure. A divorce can represent newly emerging threats, as a partner or children may react to what's happened or jostle for a share of what's left over. Recrimination or revenge can have the potential to be traumatic if emotions are acted out aggressively or destructively. Perhaps most obviously, though, in trauma, divorce may represent the end or transition from a relationship which has been emotionally, physically, or sexually abusive itself. Where threats of serious harm or violation have been present, there is a risk of post-traumatic stress, and the end of an abusive relationship is one particular point at which someone can go from surviving to starting to process what has happened, and especially so where they may feel safe to do so once again. Where a post-traumatic response is present, someone may re-experience threatening incidents in the relationship in the form of vivid flashbacks or lucid involuntary ruminations. These can happen in vivid nightmares too, which may have the effect of waking the sufferer from their sleep. Despite being safe or safer, feelings of safety might not be felt, and people can remain watchful and guarded, often being easily startled or jumpy. This can lead to trying or avoiding reminders of what's happened, or people and places associated with them. What's happened, or the subsequent suffering, can lead us with feelings or ruminations on what happened, why it happened, what might have happened, and many judgments about ourselves or others. I very often hear, "Why can't I just get over this?" or "Am I going mad?" And all of these are a natural part of an aftermath and a grieving or adjustment process. But when they persist, and when a relationship has been abusive and threatening, a post-traumatic reaction may be present. Now, a really important piece of information about post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic response, which I think everyone should know and which might help you considerably if you identify with any of these things I've outlined, is the nature of memory in trauma. Because in trauma, when our safety or integrity is so seriously threatened or violated, or others, perhaps our children or our animals, we are often in an anxious fight and flight state. And this means that a very different part of the brain is working. Now, this part of the brain, the threat center, animal brain or limbic system as it's called, is not part of the brain which is good at processing information. And what happens is that a memory is stored without processing. Often really critical to this is the time tag or time stamp on that memory. And so this is what happens when we have a flashback or an intrusive vivid memory, or even when we have a traumatic memory which doesn't seem to go away. We are reminded of a memory without a time tag, an unprocessed memory which feels like we are going through it all over again when we are reminded. Now, this is as true for someone who's been in an abusive relationship or has been the abuser in the relationship. Perpetrators can and do suffer from post-traumatic responses too, as it is for soldiers returning from war. Believe you me, the number of times I've heard, "Oh, I thought only soldiers had got that." And that's a car accident, an assault, or sexual violation. If we've been sufficiently threatened, and if the significance that endures, we're at risk from PTS. And coming back to the significance of divorce I reflected on at the start of the presentation, hopefully we can see how a difficult relationship can make for these responses, from not only potentially causing them, but also reminding us of trauma previous to the relationship, or removing supports which helped us cope with them. Trauma also leaves us with the significance of what has happened, as well as the memory. Now, usually in post-traumatic response, our beliefs have been left challenged by what has happened. We may have felt prior to our relationship that people are generally good and kind. Yet after what's happened, we may have been left with experiences where they have been threatening and unsafe. We may have felt that we were good and honest people, yet we may have been told otherwise or treated in such a way that we doubt that. We may have had to have even resort to behaviours in extreme situations which may have led us to question that. We may have felt that the future was bright, but after all that has happened, we can only see a battle ahead. Now, these thoughts or beliefs about what has happened have the potential to trigger memories. You may be aware that memory works by association. So if we have had an experience we associate with another, we get a reminder, which can trigger us if we have a trauma memory present. If we had a spouse who spoke abusively to us, working with a customer or client who does so may take us back to exactly those memories. So when we have had trauma, we have a number of sources of upset or anxiety. We have the memory of what has happened, sometimes manifesting in these very intrusive, vivid ways. We also have many questions of the significance of what has happened and reconciling ourselves, other people, and the future with that. There's the anxiety of threatening things having happened and the potential anxiety of our way of seeing ourselves, other people, and the world having fundamentally changed. Now, this is a model of trauma from the cognitive behavioural tradition, which illustrates this trauma leading to this unprocessed memory and significance and leading to multiple threats. And where post-traumatic response becomes enduring is where the coping assumes some level of avoidance of this, which maintains it. Now, coping sounds conscious, but often it isn't. In the same way someone with trauma doesn't wake themselves up for a traumatic nightmare or choose to have a flashback when visiting the site of a trauma, so too we don't control our fight and flight responses from overriding our consciousness when it determines a threat is significant enough. Your survival systems are passionately interested in keeping you alive, and in the same way you cannot stop yourself from digesting a sandwich if you have swallowed it, so too a reminder of a trauma comes along, your fight and flight system will protect you. This is how trauma becomes self-maintaining. Our brains know that there is something to be processed and worked through, but as soon as we start to do so, our fight and flight systems come in and derail that processing. This often makes for a feeling that we continue to come back to the questions trauma has raised and the memories with them. If this describes you, and sadly trauma is more common than we would like to believe, there are very good ways of working with trauma or managing our responses, which I will come to later. Trish also asked me to speak about complex trauma. The model we have just seen works well to describe complex trauma too. Complex trauma is where we have had multiple traumas, and often describes that trauma has also happened when we have been growing up. And again, sadly, childhood trauma is much more common than we would like to believe. Where someone has multiple traumas over time or lives with trauma growing up, the significance of further trauma adds to the beliefs and thoughts someone has before. Someone's identity has a large part of the trauma involved. Of course he left me. I'm worthless. Of course he treated me badly. It's the only thing I've ever learned. Also, as memories work by association, so too trauma memories may link with one another. A partner speaking abusively may remind us of a parent speaking abusively, or someone mistreating us may be reminiscent of other past abuses. As I hope this conveys, where complex trauma is present, divorce has the potential to build on the beliefs someone already has, and the potential to add another layer of memory to existing trauma, if a relationship has been abusive. Whereas post-traumatic stress often challenges the belief we may have, where complex trauma is present, further trauma affirms or verifies the beliefs we carry. So this brings to an end what is the technical part of the presentation, and I go into the theory of trauma because I really hope it demystifies some of the things we may have experienced when seriously threatening events have been present. Sadly, the likelihood is that the substantial minority, or the majority of you people I am speaking to now, may have experienced trauma and the suffering I have described. If this does fit your experience, I really hope I've described things in a way which feels respectful. My explanations have offered some insight into your experience. Now, in speaking of post-traumatic stress responses and complex trauma, I have alluded to psychologists' take on what are medical terms with symptoms and causes. Here trauma is, as I've described, events which are threatening or delivering of serious harm or violation to us or those dear to us. That which is traumatic in the non-medical sense is much more broader though. Many things can be deeply hurtful to us, even if they have not impinged on our sense of safety or self. Divorce is deeply hurtful. Even in the most agreeable of circumstances, it may represent a loss of a future imagined, or a stability which comes with change. Sadly, things are often not that agreeable, and strong emotions are part of the loss where children, finances and property can become the legal, emotional or physical battleground of such a separation. Often these exchanges are lengthy, expensive and exhausting. How we cope with these changes or confrontations will depend on who we are and the experiences that have shaped us, and how we interpret what has happened will also depend on who we are as people. Creating a clean or as clean as possible a break will allow us space in which to accommodate the change which has occurred and make sense of who we are afterwards and what we wish our futures to look like with ourselves and others. And this is because we're really wanting a distance in which to find an identity, to really find ourselves away from the relationship, potentially challenging the hurt ideas that have come from it, or at least being safe with them present. This doesn't mean you will never be friends with your ex, or friendly with your ex, if that is a good idea and you want to, but you can come back into such a role from the stability of having found roots away from the upheaval of the divorce. Establishing that distance and boundaries can be difficult, especially where mutual responsibilities, such as co-parenting or financial affairs, may still exist. In such circumstances, we have to accept we may need to communicate with our ex-partner. However, we can be strict about what we communicate about and how, and to refuse to be drawn into other matters. Conversation can be about child contact alone, for example, and no response given to digression from that topic. Where a partner has been abusive or where an individual simply doesn't feel comfortable, neutral parties, mediators, or people who can hold a boundary, such as a solicitor, should be considered. Where there is then space again, there is the opportunity to consider what you might need to cope and move on from what's happened. This is, for the vast majority, a draining and upsetting thing to happen, so it may be you simply want to grieve or rest, and this is a natural, normal response. Depression is common around such changes, and evolutionary speaking represents the need for us to withdraw, take stock, accommodate the change, and emerge again. Emerging, when we feel like it, can take many forms, but creating a life after a relationship needs to be firmly grounded. Plan for your new financial circumstances, make your home your own, wherever you find yourself, and set new routines. With these necessities in place, we can then look to consider what we might want for ourselves. For many, a meaningful life involves purposeful activity, learning, and relationships. Consider who you may want in your life and what they might bring you. You may have to establish which mutual friends side with whom, if that becomes others' way of coping with your loss. Consider how you spend your time and what you want to do. Whilst marked changes are not necessarily wise at emotional times, consider if there's things you wanted to do but have been put off, things which may be fun as well as meaningful to you, and find means of relaxing. Learning may have a part in a new life, not necessarily starting a degree course, perhaps reading a book on something you want to know about. So too finding time for your spiritual needs, however ritualized or everyday they may be, and looking after your health may be important. All of these things offer a network or a fabric of things to draw from and to anchor us into a life beyond the relationship, each communicating, "This is me now." Engaging with these things offers us the opportunity to find life on our own terms. This should offer a challenge to any meaning left over from the separation or past relationship, as it will be inherently about us and our worth if we choose wisely, and we are more likely to find similarly minded people by pursuing what we value. Of course, this is not simple. It is an undertaking to motivate ourselves, and the residue of a significant relationship may ensue. However, just because it does not mean we cannot reach towards a life we want for ourselves. Where trauma is part of finding a new life, we may have to work harder and challenge ourselves around very heightened feelings. Trauma generates considerable agitation, so building a life where we manage this, from regular meals to control blood sugar related agitation, to multiple occasions where we can calm ourselves, means that we can bring in the more thinking part of the brain and make less reactive decisions. We may need to ground ourselves from more intrusive memories and encounter more toxic thoughts head on, and do see my YouTube channel for more of those. Yet whether we demonstrate post-traumatic stress responses or not, memories of divorce or difficulties within the relationship and what they mean to us can remain. Where a memory refuses to go away, where it feels as if it continues to boomerang back at us and bring hurtful feelings with it, is when we may wish to consider therapy for concentrated work. A relatively new therapy which focuses on memories is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. EMDR is a gold standard treatment for PTSD, can be used with complex trauma, and can work with many presentations where a memory can be found to be significant. It works by processing a memory, by giving it the time tag that I mentioned is missing from a trauma memory. Very often as part of this process, the significance of the memory diminishes or hurtful appraisals become less toxic. Now, the unusual name, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is because in its standard form, the therapist waves their fingers or uses some means of making the eyes to move from side to side. Hand taps can be used, and even sounds passing from left to right ear. It's the side-to-side movement which is important. Now, as unusual as this sounds, it is thought to replicate rapid eye movement sleep, which is considered important in the formation of memory, or distract the fight and flight part of the brain from the memory-making parts so that they can do their job. Now, I bring up Emdr first because in my experience not many people have heard about it outside of the therapy world. And what is noteworthy about Emdr is that there is research which suggests it works in half the time of other trauma-focused therapies. The other prominent memory-specific therapy is CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy for trauma. Now, CBT can have a rough time in many quarters. Some people like it, some people really do not. Often where trauma is in the frame, or where difficult memories are present, much of the CBT which is given does not address that. It offers a series of exercises where one copes better with the symptoms. Whenever I get a referral where trauma is in the picture and where CBT is being attempted is stated, my first thought is, yes, but CBT for what? CBT for trauma addresses memories directly, and like EMDR, seeks to put time tags on trauma memories and addresses the significance of these events. CBT can also work very directly with the meanings, significances, or beliefs that have arisen from an event like divorce. So CBT and EMDR are memory-focused, structured therapies which seek to address your suffering and the root of it. Should you wish to explore those events directly, CBT engages in very detailed discussions tailored to your tolerances, where EMDR follows wherever your consciousness takes you. It's free associative, flow of consciousness based. And for all the process and predictability of those methods, there's still a lot of room for talking. Counselling, be it in the person-centered fashion or in the psychodynamic tradition, can offer a space for reflecting and recognising how a divorce or trauma fits in the significance of your life and your story as a person. It can open up real challenges to the hurtful beliefs and significances which may have emerged from the difficult aspects of separating or relationships, and offer a validation to who you want to and should be. I describe more of the processes of CBT and EMDR, go into more detail about trauma theory and the biology of trauma, as well as providing some tools for managing trauma and responses and agitation on my YouTube channel. Just search for Beacon Psychology Service and look for me. If you Google Beacon Psychology Service, you can also find my homepage with my contact details. Now, I am a therapist and psychologist, and I believe passionately in the utility and possibility of therapy of all kinds to provide those benefits. But I wouldn't be so foolish to suggest it is the only way. Many relationships can challenge our perceptions, can validate our experiences, and to support us to promote ourselves. Experiences too have the power to challenge what we believe, empower our faith in ourselves and others, and push us towards what our values would desire of us. At a time when I would guess many in this audience may have uncertainty in the future or be taking stock of a difficult relationship or events within it, I wish for you the calming of suffering, the overcoming of doubt and disbelief, and the blossoming of you and your values, whether it be through therapy or whatever paths you may take. Thank you for your attention today. I hope it's been helpful, and the very best to you.